So I'm teaching classical mechanics, and I thought that as a part of this class, we can show the physics of a martial art, which is called Aikido. The reason that there are different martial arts, of course, and the reason that I pick Aikido is because it has a so-called circular motion. It's not like a linear martial art that karate or taekwondo it is. So this involves a lot of angular momentum. So Sensei Arnold Molina, which is doing Aikido for about 20 years, is going to actually help us with the demonstration. Just to introduce you, Sensei Molina, he started Aikido back in 1989, and he has been trained in several dojos like Dallas, New York, under Yamada Sensei, and they've done Aikikai, and also the late Toi Sensei in Chicago. So we're starting with actually what is Aikido, and we're going to start from actually scratch. So.
Hi, hello. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. As you said, I've been studying Aikido for a little bit over some decades or so, and Aikido really fascinated me from the first time that I saw it. It's very different from other styles of martial arts, and a lot of times in many schools, dojos that I've practiced in, I tend to run into a lot of physicists. For some reason. Well, to me, then Aikido is an expression of physics in action. So we always have a lot of physicists, a lot of doctors, a lot of intellectual types, a lot of times taking Aikido classes. So when he started practicing with us, then he at some point said, wait a minute, this is physics in action. I said, yeah, this is cool. So he said, I'm a professor of physics. I said, whoa. So we've gotten a chance to now arrange this and give a chance to present Aikido to you. Now, with that being said, I have, like I said, a little bit more experience than Professor Dimakis, so he's been practicing this. We're going to do our best to show you what we can do. Obviously, we cannot go at higher speeds. The more experience you have, Aikido is kind of interesting like that, where you can actually go full speed and not pull punches and not really try to get each other, you know what I mean, a little bit, because your partner can receive the falls very well. They've trained to that level. So he has a certain level of training. Our club is at a certain level of growth. So we'll do the best that we can. We also have some presentation to show you higher level Aikido so you can get a chance to see. Aside from that, I'll also get into trying to really explain some of these ideas of physics according to how he's instructing his class, and then also give you an overview of Aikido in general. Just to what is it, why are we doing it, and how does it work, I would say. So just to start off, we'll just practice a little bit, the same way that we would in a class, and you can just observe for a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing. Yes? So as you see, as we're working here, we're not really doing battle. I'm not concerned with him hitting, punching me. The idea is not being here, hopefully, when he's there. So one idea of Aikido is distance. As I reach my hand out, there's a sphere, there's a cylinder of area around me that I can hold. Once he's past that, now it's a threat to me. So as long as I can stay outside of that space, reach, right, I'm okay. I'm not concerned with trying to get him in Aikido. Different from another martial art. I want to do something to him. I don't want to do anything to him. He's doing something to me. Aikido can't be done to somebody. Aikido has to happen as a result of we're studying ideas of balance. So he's learning how to attack and how to fall. So these are skills that he's building. But part of what we're learning is the physics of our bodies. There's a major force that we're always working against, right? Gravity, right? So when we look at how our bodies are aligned, how we're standing in our bodies, there's a way to transfer force through your body in a relaxed manner. If I tell people all the time, when we're little, you learn how to move on the ground, you learn how to get yourself to your hands and knees, you work your way up to your feet, and then you take a few steps. People pat you on your bottom and they send you on into your life, and that's all the instruction you ever get for the rest of your life as to general movement practice, right? You got to your feet, you're walking good. But there's a refinement of that movement that is possible. Martial arts are designed to try to help remedy a lot of that gap of information. In Aikido specifically, we start primarily from the stance. If we're standing standing, right? Depending on his postural alignment, he is either off balance or balanced. And as we try to learn how to right the body a little bit, he can get sturdier in his stance. He can be a little bit more relaxed in his movement, and he can hold this shape of his body a little bit more by transferring force through his muscles, through his skeletal alignment down into his feet. And that kind of, in a sense, as I'm pushing on his hands, I'm really pushing through his body into his feet, or he's allowing this force to transfer through into his feet. So we start from this position, this premise. And then from here, then we learn how to move and rotate with it. How to then connect into another person and then off balance their central equilibrium. Okay? So first of all, again, like I said, we have to study how do we align ourselves. So over time, as you practice Aikido, you get a pretty good working knowledge of anatomy, physiology, how the bones are designed. So we go into ideas of, just to attach a little flag here to physics, right? We're studying the levers of the body. How do we mechanically move and keep the alignment of our spines and transfer weight and balance through our bodies and extend and lower ourselves, rotate our bodies, and keep that balance. Most of the time, if we haven't had any of this instruction, we will fall into whatever habits we've created in our lives, and we'll start to walk or create something like this. So now imagine if you don't correct this, and then you start taking some kind of martial art, right? You're limited by how much study you have had in your posture, right? So to that degree, as we start to better our personal balance, then we can start to connect with another person and start to deal with opposing force. So as he push, let's do it this way. So as he's pushing, there's a force that's coming at me. And the more that I can hold my balance, the more I can receive this without taking too much, like getting lost in my balance. If I can take that and then deflect it in a rotation, he starts to lose his balance. I can take him down into the ground. I can raise him up in the vertical dynamic, horizontal rotational dynamics, right? You can receive him and then start angular momentum, as Professor Dimakis was talking about before, where now we're taking linear movement, an idea of line, and taking it straight instead of receiving it straight on, right? We're taking it now and deflecting it into a rotation. The same way you see linebackers, running backs, right? Go through the line like a football, right? Those guys can't get tackled. Why? Because they're spinning, rotating like a top. So we practice a lot of this in Aikido. This gentleman that you see this picture of here, his name is Morihei Ueshiba. He passed away in 1969. He was born in 1883 in Wakayama Prefecture in Japan. He was instrumental in a lot of the pioneering in Japan. He actually took an expedition into northern Japan and founded Hokkaido. And that entire area took, I mean, literally like got a bunch of families together, 30 families, and said, come on, the government wants us to go and break into this wilderness in northern Japan. He was one of these people. He studied a lot of martial arts in his life. He saw his father beat up by local gangsters, thugs, mafia in his town. And as a child, he set out to be strong. He wanted to be able to overpower these people. And so he's dedicated his life to doing a lot of strength training. He was very powerful. He was doing a lot of farming work, and at the same time was taking a lot of martial arts. He also went into the army. He saw war. And when he came back from his war experiences, he had seen the violence that human beings can do to each other, and he realized that as he continued to study the aggressive nature of the martial arts that he was studying at the time, he was perpetuating this idea of violence. He came to the conclusion for himself. After that, then he had an epiphany of sorts, and he decided to take his martial arts and revitalize them, transform them into something less damaging. And around the age of about 42, he coined, I guess, or said, this is now Aikido. Aikido means I is harmony, or love. I. Ki is spirit or energy. Do is a way. Different from a jujitsu, like a jitsu, which is your techniques, or a buge, which is a martial art. He's calling this a do in Japan, which is a way. It's not just an art form, but it's a way of life, a way of thinking, an idea, a philosophy, beyond just he says that these physical techniques are simply a metaphor for what Aikido is really about. And he said this is a vehicle for transforming, one, ourselves, but two, relieving violence in the world. So he took martial arts where in the past where he would take something like this and there would be breaks, right, and kicks and things like this where snapping arms and wrists. And he took these and started rounding them and using the joints the way that they're designed and stopping motion in this way. He took these arts that would break again and just let them dissolve, right? And so this was, radical in its concept. Very few arts. There are arts, Tai Chi and things like that are very yielding, very soft. But here he had taken these from, and he had studied a lot of spear technique and a lot of sword technique. So in the old days, of course, they fought with spears and bayonets and things like that. And in the early Aikido films, you'll see a lot of fighting with bayonets and spears and things like this. So he learned this thing, but he transformed this. Again, he cut the tips off and made a short staff and said, we'll use this as a weapon this way. Right? And all of these arts designed like this. So as he grabs this, on the other hand, let's do this way so they can see. And he worked it this way so that you can use this more as an instrument of beating people in the same way. If I take my arm, I can do the same motions as if I had the staff in my hand. And changing the art form in this way. A lot of the motions too, you see him striking at me like this, right? We don't really go around karate chopping each other, in the world, right? It looks kind of fake and it looks silly, but we're studying this again from the idea of the sword. So he was also part of the sword culture. Born in 1883, there was still his teacher, one of his teachers, who was teaching him these really brutal, forms of fighting, was still one of these old leftover samurais from the samurai days. Literally would walk around in one of these, a hakama, and his kimono and swords and knives strapped to his back, and was still walking around in Japan in this way. So a lot of this art also comes from sword culture. How the sword was used, how you strike with it, how you block with it, how you thrust with it. And these also, again, train our hands in the way that we do it. We don't use these offensively. I'm not trying to hurt him when I practice with these. I'm training more, again, to consider, you grab this one? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Either way. Right? So these kinds of forms of how you would strike and move. If you strike, right, and move. and throw, right? Rather than using the weapon in of itself to do damage. So the other thing too is what it creates is ideas of geometry. When I hold this sword like this, and the tip is now the point of that here, my body starts to form a wedge. And O-sensei talked a lot about triangle, circle, and square as the fundamental building blocks of the universe, the geometrical building blocks of the universe. Everything is created from triangles, circles, and squares. I also taught art. From there, you extrapolate into three-dimensional objects, cones and spheres and cubes and cylinders and such. And then from there, as you put puzzle pieces together, everything in the world is made up from these geometric shapes. So as we start to practice in Aikido, you start looking at ideas of, as he's coming to me, I'm creating angles of movement. So this becomes this triangle motion, right? Then I can turn it into a rotational, circular motion. When I pin him and I stop him and I create downward solid force, I create a square, metaphorically. Right? He's tapping because he says he's had enough of a stretch. Okay? So this immobilizes him. So this is a squared kind of stance here, a squared kind of action. So we start to kind of study these ideas of motion, of triangles, circles, and squares in Aikido. We don't really so much, again, have an offense or an idea of punching and kicking each other. As he's coming to me, there is ideas where I can strike, but we use these ideas of more of a distancing thing. If I can hit him, I can touch him, I'm at a proper distance. If he strikes at me and I can't, there's too much space between me, and then as he can turn around and continue attack, there you go. Like I said, we're still learning. So so we use these strikes and these ideas of striking as more of distancing things, and they put me in a proper position to be able to do the things that I need to do at a proper distance. Okay? Overall, we're also studying, again, to get back into like a more of a discussion of physics, disrupting this central equilibrium. The more he studies in Aikido how to hold his stance, the better. But there's angles. Once he makes this wedge shape, he's off balance in these corners. These points here and these points to the front. Change feet. This point also to the front. But forward and backwards, he's pretty sturdy. He can hold his stance in this way. Once he starts directing this central line of equilibrium at me, then it's again, we go back to the idea of distance. It's only as far as his arm can reach and as far as he can reach to me, as to when he can touch me or not touch me. And as I start applying these other ideas of movement, we have basically three different ways of addressing this. Irimi, entering motion. So as he comes to me, I can move into him, move past him, kind of like cars passing head on to each other. I can enter into his space, which is a different idea most of the time from most kind of martial arts kind of things or ideas. A lot of times, right, block, do something, or get out of the please, right? Moving back away from something. In Aikido, it's a different idea to have something coming in at you as they're trying to come at you. Another idea then becomes the rotational element, which is turning and looking in the direction of the attack. So I'm now facing the direction where he's coming from. And one more idea is a tactical retreat, which we call tenshin, which creates more distance and also creates an angle. If we're standing on this line together, all of these ideas, whether they're entering, or they're turning, or they're retreating, or getting off of this line, he can only hold his attack as long as he maintains that line of trajectory. Right? Makes sense what I'm saying? And yes, we can get into discussions about what happens if they do more, 2, 3, 4, 5 punches. Yes. Hold those questions for a little bit. Let me keep going with what we're talking about here. Here's the idea. So here's this one line of attack. Once he's past this point, he has either one or two things that happen. He can either stand stable, and that's done. again, like in Aikido, I'm not concerned whether or not he gives me a second punch or not. As long as he doesn't, then I'm fine. As soon as he changes to do so, we've now created another line of trajectory. Yeah? And now again, I have to either deflect that off the line, turn with it, or step back away from it. Once we make contact, I make contact with that line of trajectory, then I can start to rotate. And now we get into then studying also too the levers of the body. I use my levers and I collapse his. So my levers allow me then to take this motion and settle it into my legs and take my force of my spine down into my body and gather his balance and pull it off of his. His leg now becomes a fulcrum right at the hip socket. And I can pull his balance. If he decides to surrender that, keep both feet on the floor and fold from your hips. There. If he just collapses his spine, this is not good, right? He's got the back of his head, his face, and things like this. So we also study dynamics of falling in Aikido. He's keeping his distance here from me while losing his balance at the same time. And then I can start to rotate him. Now I start folding joints. Yes, some of this becomes uncomfortable to him, yeah? And if he goes against this, yeah, he could get hurt. So his idea now is to take that central line of equilibrium and rotate it. Right? Yeah. To absorb this motion and be able to fold his body the way that it generally is designed to fold, right? Different from, right, something against the joint where it would break, yeah? So in Aikido then we have different ideas of this and different ways of manipulating the body. One, like I said, we can work the hip socket and move him off his hip. We can work his spine, moving his spine off of alignment. Yeah. We can take his right shoulder, throw him from his shoulder. We can, take his elbow, move his elbow. Right? And again, he wants to generally keep his elbow, so body will follow to keep a hold of his elbow. If he doesn't, then yes, you can get hurt. From here, wrists, the wrist bends in this fashion, the fingers bend in this fashion. Yes? So motion can be created in him. But more so, I think about it in terms of Aikido when we practice with each other. First pose? No, Newton's.
Force?
Newton's, yeah. Momentum?
Okay. For momentum, when I go and strike directly, we're going to have conservation of linear momentum. I try to avoid that, right? Because mostly you're going to apply force to force. So the big guy is going to knock you down, right? Or if you don't mind, someone's going to apply pressure. That means force over a small area is going to fracture. Okay, so that's what happens in mostly linear martial arts. You punch, that means you're applying something fast. The kick of the punch in karate is about 7 meters per second for the average person, because you do the rotation, and that you apply on a small area, that's going to give you enormous pressure. That's how you fracture. Now in Aikido we don't try that. So as I attack him, he's going to put me in a circular motion. Now the reason for that is because through angular momentum conservation, you can get 1800 newtons. Yes, because the faster I go, the more initial higher angular momentum I have. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's say you have a city plane. No, that's bad. Old vinyl player. Remember with the old vinyl records? Okay, you put a penny on that. Okay, let's say this spins fast. You put the penny closer to the center. What's going to happen? No big deal. It's going to stay there. You put it closer to the rim, and it's going to escape. Like a projectile, right? It's going to just fly. So in Aikido, by doing the circular motion, depending on the initial speed of the attacker, you can create an enormous angular momentum. And yes, actually you can fracture someone, but that's not your purpose. Exactly as Sensei said, it's not the purpose. But yes, you're creating humongous forces. On a punch over karate, the force is about 700 newtons. And of course that's enough to do damage. 700 newtons, as an example, is basically lifting a person of 70 kilos. And then let it go. Now imagine 1800 newtons, that means lifting a person of 180 kilograms. That's a lot.
And, well, like I said, applying the leverage, right? I can't take a person weighing that much I don't have that physical strength. The only way that I can move somebody of that is to have their balance. And then he starts to move a lot easier. Easier, right? It's like I tell people all the time in classes too. Imagine a large vase, or a heavy ceramic vase. To move it, to push it across the floor requires a tremendous amount of effort. But if you can tip that on its edge and roll it, old ladies can move furniture, yeah? Like this, yeah? It makes sense. So we're applying just, again, leverage and ideas. And he also makes a good point about the penny. A lot of times in Aikido, we are trying to be the center of the sphere. So if I hold the center line here, let's see, if he's coming at me, and I hold the center line to the circumference or to the periphery of this, right, again, here, his body's already going out to the centrifugal force. What we study to do in Aikido, you take me, eating me now. You turn, just keep watching. Eating me now. So in Aikido, I try to get into the center. Here I can regain my balance, right? Now I can reverse this to him, right, a little bit, right? But the idea more so is that as he's learning, he's trying to study how to move off of this periphery, keep his head into the middle. As soon as he surrenders his body to the centrifugal force, he's away from me. The attack is over, the thing is over. It gives me enough time to run and call for help, do something for myself, yeah? Again, we're not concerned. I'm not concerned with beating him down, right? Making sure that he learns his lesson. I need him away from me. The other idea, too, is this. Unless I choose to have him come into the center of this, and then I can rotate him from the center out. So then we have two ideas, centrifugal force and centripetal force, bringing things into the center of equilibrium and expelling them from that central equilibrium line. Where are we at? Let me see what's next. Yeah, so we're talking about all these things too. Overall, too, I'll just give a little quick talk about this too, is this idea of overall that we've been talking about philosophically, what we're doing, not trying to do damage to another. Even though you see me turning and twisting and bending his body this way, and he's kind of in pain a little bit and rotating, overall, he's safe. And this is stretching and moving his body the way that it's designed. Right? His fingers point this way. If I take his arm and I pull it this way, it's another story, yeah? But as long as he's designed this way and this way, right, he can fold and bend this way. This starts to apply pressure to his body, and it becomes very therapeutic, believe it or not. You can practice Aikido. You're stretching and moving the spine. We go back again to the beginning, what I was talking about, postural alignment, how we're studying how we move in our bodies, how we move in our spine. Over everything, it's the spine. And more as the research comes out, Western science is figuring out what maybe Eastern cultures have been doing for thousands, hundreds of years. Understanding how to maintain and hold this alignment of the spine. It improves our health, flexibility of the spine, allows us to have better range of motion, use of joints, and most importantly, helps us to understand balance and, like I said, central equilibrium. How do we hold our balance this way? The more that we relax our musculature onto that central line, the more efficient that our movement becomes. That's in soft tissue all around the bone, all our muscles, and also too the alignment of the bones. Now sometimes we've had injuries or surgeries or accidents or things like that maybe, or turns around, or you were talking about the spinal things, that where they seem incorrectable to these kinds of things. But a lot of times, many things are correctable just by movement. Correct movement and practice. As you practice, then everything starts to come onto line. And then you can really understand, we talk about like gravity all the time, but very rarely do we actually pay attention to what's happening to us on a daily basis. Like I said, we'll start to fall into habits. And you'll notice yourself, whenever you catch yourself kind of starting to do this, or, giving into your body this way, you're surrendering to gravity without attention to your, and that's a clue, a big flag for yourself is to, there's something that has not been developed in your body to be able to allow yourself to sit naturally, to sit using the frame of your body the way it was designed. Yeah? And so this is, again, another part of the process. And as we're doing these exercises and these movements, I can take this spine, step back and stretch. I can stretch his body. I can stretch his arms. movement, and then he can start to practice relieving himself into the mat to dissipate force, which brings me to another point. Okay, so the other half of Aikido, what we're doing, not just throwing, so again, studying the dynamics of how do we now surrender our bodies to gravity without getting hurt, without bumping ourselves all the way through. So we have two basic ideas of how to escape. When he's locked, when his movement is stopped or redirected and he has nowhere else to go, he has to figure out a way to get his spine without the top of his head hitting the mat. So he surrenders his knees, hips, and spine to the mat. Again, notice he's keeping a pretty good alignment of his spine there to hold himself together. And another idea then is going forward, where this way, yeah. So you surrender your body. He's making his body basically into a wheel. And we start talking again in terms of physics, and there's very little damage that's happening to him because his point of contact is constantly changing. Yeah, what do we call it?
Static friction, right?
Static, okay.
We try to be like a wheel. And of course, we're not wheels, right? So what we're trying to do, of shape, has to be like a wheel. Now, my first experience in Aikido was that when I was falling, I was using my two hands, right? Like little baby sometimes. Okay? And that didn't work. Then Sensei told me, no, you just have to go to the rim. I was afraid that I'm going to flip over. I'm going to do like that. Finally, the ultimate one, we try to reach that, is to go shoulder to shoulder. So going here, there, back, like a wheel. Doesn't hurt. So again, it's like having a square and you throw down an incline. What's it going to do? It's going to bump. And you have a wheel, you have full rotational motion. So that's the way that someone escapes in Aikido. Because a lot of people, they see these things and say, why this guy falls down? I mean, just for fun. The reason is, if you stay stable and someone else put force against some of your joints, you're going to damage your joints. You try to avoid that. Okay, so there's a lot of physics into that.
And it's absorption of the spiral. Right? When I take him and I wrap his wrist up tight, this is all spiraling into motion. And if he doesn't surrender his body, the force of the torque that's happening here goes into his wrist and it will pop, it will snap. But his body then, he learns to absorb that and take the mass of his body over this point of rotation and surrender himself into the ground this way to escape out of it, And this way we can keep practicing. If I damage my partner, then I can't practice no more, right? Bad feelings between me and him. But again, we go back to the philosophy of Aikido. I don't want to hurt him. I want to train with him. The better that he gets, the better I get, and vice versa. So again, these ideas of movement here, as we start to think about falling, losing our balance. Now, we've been talking about holding the balance. But as I lose my balance, when I go backwards, if I'm working to maintain my spine, I now work off of the fulcrum of my hip and work to counterbalance the movement of the top of my body with the movement of my lower body. And when I lose my balance at some point, I can move myself carefully into the ground to absorb shock and force so I don't just take it, smack your head. Lived a couple of years in Chicago, so I slipped a lot of ice. And I watched a lot of people do it too. Most people, hospital, concussion. I watched a lot of people smack their head on concrete. And just from training, just naturally you start to learn how to rotate your body and you keep your body a little bit safe. As you start getting more used to this, you can start to take a little bit more motion in it and continue that spiral all the way up into standing. We start people in the beginning too, teaching them how to understand the fulcrum of their hip this way. So we take the lower leg out of it, so you strengthen your hip and learn how to balance like this, and then learn how to rotate like this. Then when I take this and I extend the leg off the knee, I can now still use this same fulcrum, and I can practice relaxing my body more and holding my balance and taking everything soft into the ground this way, so that again I don't take force through my whole body. It's too much damage. You won't last. We get a lot of people in their 40s, 50s from other martial arts. Done. Knees shot, elbows shot. It's over. That's a career. In Aikido, it's the young, fast 20-year-olds are not the ones that we're concerned about. It's the guys in their 50s and their 60s that have been practicing 35, 40 years that can move much more efficiently. It's kind of the reverse of other martial arts, and mainly because we're studying these structures, these ideas and these dynamics of body movement. Moving the body, folding the body into the ground, maintaining the spine, using the joints of the body so that you can now manipulate your body. We also do some groundwork like this, where you can do the same techniques, moving on your knees and your feet, so that you strengthen your hips, so that as you move to standing, all this motion now connects. Notice there's a relationship between my shoulders and my hips as I move. Notice there's a relationship between my elbows and my knees as I move. And then a little bit more harder to see, and notice this relationship with my ankles to my wrists, how everything is connected. Plugging in, again, working against the force of gravity. Maintaining, even if I hold to an angle to throw or to do something, this angle is still connected to the center point, which is plugged into this triangle. Right? So there's a stability foundation, and then giant lever. The levers of my legs, working through the lever of my hip, working through all the little levers of my spine, and then through the levers of my arm. A machine, right? Learning how to use your body dynamically in this fashion. Then the opposite, learning how then to use it to take your balance and change it over time too. Then we can start at higher speeds. We'll show you a little clip in a minute. At higher speeds, then you can start to release your body a little bit more freely. And again, like I said, take force a little stronger, right? And survive your fall without damage. Okay? What's this?
Just go to, that's just a picture.
Let's see Endo.
Endo is the next slide. Yeah, next slide. Next. That one, yeah. Just click on that.
This is a clip of a very high-level martial Aikidoist who also studied with the founder. One of my favorites to see, and you will also see very high-level dynamic falling, much more than what we're doing here. But like I said, everything's practice. Click that. Click the bottom there. The YouTube.
Yeah, just click on the video. Control. It's control. Should be control.
Please stand by. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, just copy that.
Notice again all the ideas that we're talking about. Look at his spine, how relaxed his body is as he's moving. And then you'll also see the ability of his partners to be able to stay with his movement and not just be thrown off right away, and to be able to absorb more torque, more rotational motion. This gentleman is maybe in his 60s, late 60s. Maybe practicing over 40 to 50 years. And he's responding to what the person is offering, how this person is offering his body to them. Once they're off balance, then that person either has a choice: release themselves into a fall or continue to attack if they can and try to fight for their balance. Once the balance though is lost, it's very hard to regain any kind of attack. Yeah, just teetering them like we said, like the base that we were talking about. And again, demonstrating relatively gently here, not so much in a martial way, more so in the artistic aspect of it, of this. Hmm? Yeah, just kind of folding his arms up a little bit, pulling his balance down into his knees. Yeah. So his partners, of course, were higher level practitioners and doing things that it was very difficult for me to show it, especially Nick. So we want to keep him teaching your physics class, yeah. So, but that's the idea. And which brings me to another idea too. Is as we a lot of times too when we begin Aikido, we're studying. You say you see us grabbing a lot, doing all these kinds of things when he's attacking and grabbing, which is not so much really realistic in these days. We think about fighting in this way, but in the old days, when a lot of these grabs were derived out of this. As I meet a samurai in the street, and I draw my sword, he reaches out to stop my grab, right? And this is what would happen. So then you have to now defend with the grab of the sword. So a lot of techniques were derived out of this, out of grabbing this way and then moving. So the idea here is grab and punch. Most people don't grab, right? Give me your lunch money. They're going to do something to you. So we start a lot of times making contact with each other, because in this way I can feel where his force is coming from. If I try to move against that force, if I push against that force, it's very difficult. Hold tight, right? So if I try to use just my muscular effort, it's very difficult to move him. But if I relax and surrender that into and start to create rotation, if he chooses to hold on to me, again, he's at the mercy of centripetal force. And in this way too, relaxed joints, then you can also apply ideas of torque into the body, which folds his joint. This kind of is a pressure point, it hurts him. This is why he's collapsing. But it folds the body up and creates this torque. You can, again, create this torque this way. But the idea is maintaining contact. And as we practice this, and I can feel where he's moving, and I can learn how to create ease, and I can learn how to move him in his body and create motion, then I get more sensitive, so that as he's moving, I can create this kind of situation where he's now trying to get a hold of me, right? It leaves me free to move, rather than, oh my God, yeah? So we want more of this idea where I see that he's trying to invade this space, and I grab, let's do grab. Yeah. See? Opens up spaces in him. See? The more that he's concerned with these, right, the more it's opening up other ideas for him. For me to do to him. So we study this, and then we study different ideas from these kinds of grabs here to these kinds of grabs, cross angle, double-handed, right, moving in, and maybe people balance this way, 2 hands on one arm, more to 3, just do this thing, change it. Be easier. Yeah. Here too, very strong, hard to move, but there's angles of motion that, again, are working with the idea of the skeleton, right, that help me to move. Then we also have ideas of going around behind. Oh. Yeah, sure. Right. They create these ideas so that you can allow attacks from behind in this sense. We have grabs and things like this. These ones now translate. Once we get used to making contact and feeling this motion, this same line of attack in 10, if he folds his hand and creates a fist and pulls his fist back, and then steps forward, is the same line as the grab, right? So if I can grab, and I can get off that line, or he changes hands. Change this hand, let's do this. And he punches, right? It's the same line. So I build my sensitivity to this motion, and then it allows me to continue practice, then into strikes. We practice these overhead strikes and these oblique strikes that you saw based out of the sword. But not so much, again, because we're doing karate chops, but we're studying vertical motion. This attack is an overhead strike, right? Can translate to strikes like this, stabbing, these kinds of ideas of motion. We study these oblique strikes, which again can translate to hooks or things like this, or roundhouse kind of ideas of movement. We study these, which come from the thrusting of the sword, right, which is straight punches. And anything in between that, if you look at it as a clock, here's the vertical strike, here's the oblique strike, here's the linear thrust here. Anything in between there is just a combination of any of those 3 points. So the more that we study very specifically overhead shomenuchi, overhead striking, how to deflect this over, or, go ahead again, deflecting it down, under, right? We're studying this circle, this sphere, in this direction. When he goes to the oblique, yokomenuchi, now we're studying the diagonal aspect of the sphere, right, in that rotational movement. And again, like we said, I can put myself to the outside of it, or I can take myself to the inside. Oh yeah, here's another example of what we were just talking about, right? How a